Hello everybody. There are several videos out there that talk about cleaning supplies and others that talk about tools that are useful for model train repairs. I've learned a great deal from all of these videos. I decided it might be a good idea to try to bring all of these great ideas from various videos, along with a few suggestions of my own, together into one video. That video ended up being longer than I had anticipated, so I decided to break it into two videos. This is the first of those videos. This video will focus on some tools that are good to have on hand for basic repair. Additional tools would be needed if you're considering some higher level repairs like pulling and replacing wheels, but I think the tools I mentioned will handle just about any repairs a typical hobbyist will take on. This is what I use for a workbench. Of course, it's actually a computer desk, but I use it for repairs, and it actually works quite well for the amount of work I do. The plastic drawers to the left are full of parts and supplies, and the space behind the door to the right has cleaning supplies. As you can see here, the keyboard tray has become a very nice tool tray. Every tool has a spot, and all I have to do is pull it out, and I have access to just about any tool I need. I'll now use this video to talk about tools, and I'll use the second video to talk about cleaning materials. Something I use when I'm working on this desk is this old cutting board that I got from the kitchen and sanitized it a bit. And it's a great surface for using for soldering. You can see some leftover solder there. I use it for cutting on if I'm using my X-Acto knife. And it's also a great surface for pounding on. If I'm working with link couplers or something where I need to be pounding, it's a great surface for that. Then I also picked up some of this cobalt liner. I heard about this on another video. And it comes in a much larger roll than I need for this, but I've got some shelves out in the garage that I need to reline, so I'll probably use the rest of it out there. It's a nice soft surface. It grabs a little bit, and it's a great surface to work on top of the cutting board. Here's a variety of very common tools that I have, just your standard pliers, a couple different sizes of needle nose pliers with wire cutters in them. This is a needle nose pliers that has a bit of a bend to it, so you can kind of reach around a little bit. That comes in very handy sometimes. And then a standard vice grips. Sometimes I use that to hold one wire while I'm doing some soldering, and if I need another set of hands, I have this tweezers that has a little base on it. I know you can buy these vice type things that have different arms and clips on them to hold things, but I usually manage to get things pretty well taken care of between those two. A couple other tweezers. This is your standard tweezers that you just squeeze, but this is one that goes the other way. As you squeeze it, it opens. So when you let go, then the pressure is on. That's really, really nice to have. In fact, they're all three, I think, pretty indispensable. And then a couple of sizes of wire cutters. And whether I'm using those with an engine or an accessory or working on my layout, those are very handy to have too. These are some more pretty standard tools. Typical screwdriver, and this is one that has the changeable ends. So really it's 4 screwdrivers in one. So that saves a lot of space. Very easy to find. Some smaller screwdrivers. I do have more out in the garage in my tool chest out there, but these seem to meet all of my needs here. These are actually socket wrenches. So there's a 3/8 inch and a 1/4 inch, and these work very nicely for when you're working on your trains. This is one of my Hudsons. These fit the bolt there very nicely, and then the 1/4 inch fits there. Now sometimes this comes up a little, it makes it tight in between there. So sometimes this won't work down there so nicely. This will work very nicely on this particular engine. So sometimes you have to use a different wrench to start it, but most of the time this does work. And this is one of those headbands with a flashlight in it. And I love using this thing. Yes, I have a light on my workbench, but there's times that I need this to get the light exactly where I need it. If I'm working in a spot that has a lot of shadows, I also like using it underneath my layout when I'm working on wiring underneath of my layout. This tool has a wire cutters on the end, but it also has some crimpers sections farther back. And I don't use this for train repairs or accessory work, but I do use it a lot on my layout for the connectors I use. So depending upon what kind of wiring you do on your layout and what kind of connectors you use, a crimpers like this could be very handy. This tool here, it says on the handle, it calls it a vice grips, but I more often hear it called either a ring pliers or a ring remover. And what this is used for, if you notice, as you squeeze it, the end here separates. Now, if you watch one of my earlier videos, you know that I talked about these sintered trucks here that have the sintered sides on and how delicate they can be to remove. So that's where this ring pliers comes in. Because what you can do, you take those tabs down there and you put the ring pliers on those tabs and you separate the truck enough so that these will now come out. Now, this may not open enough to really open those tabs enough to get the wheels out. So I've seen some people that they'll put little pieces of shim on each side to give it more spacing. Or what I also do on this once in a while is rather than having this side with that hole in that prong, I take it out and I put this whole thing outside of that prong. So it gives a little more separation in the jaw. Either way, as you're using it to separate those prongs, you still need to be very careful, because if this slips off of there, you can still knock one of these sidings off. I can only think of 2 times over the years I've been doing this that's happened to me. And what I've had good success with is I clean it off real good. I make sure there's a good fit there. And I just use something like Gorilla Glue. I'm sure there are other super glues that will also do the job, but that's what's worked for me, and I've had no trouble with them since then. So again, use the jaws on this to separate those prongs, and then you should be able to safely get the wheels in and out of this type of truck. A variety of other common but useful tools here. Obviously the hammer, well, you're not going to use a hammer a lot, but if you're working with link couplers and maybe a few other things, you might have to do some tapping once in a while. The square I probably use more for landscaping purposes if I'm custom building a building or something like that. So that is mostly used for landscaping. The X-Acto knife too, sometimes it might be used for taking insulation off of a wire, but a lot of times that's also for landscaping purposes. Scissors, whatever you might need it for, tape measure, a metal ruler. I do recommend a metal ruler if you're going to be using an X-Acto knife. And then you may be familiar with these as a magnetic cup. So if you're working on a train, taking some parts apart, I would have this empty and I can put those in there and they're not going to fall out. The parts will grab. And I also always keep a couple dimes in there that, of course, are used for the dime test. On wheels, if you're not sure what that is, check out my video that talks about cleaning wheels, and it explains how you use that for the spacing of the wheels on the rolling stock. So in the previous segment, I mentioned working with link couplers, and here are a few tools that are really good if you have to work with link couplers like this. This one here, you can use to remove the coupler. So you see there's 2 holes there. You put the weight in the one hole, and then you find a way to support the car a little bit. Then you can take a punch and put it on that, give it a few whacks, and that pin should fall out. And it'll fall down into that hole. Then when you're ready to replace it, you push the pin up, you use the other side, so you put the weight again in that, but now this metal piece is up against the pin. So you can take this punch, which has a slot in, that goes over the pin, again, a few whacks, and it should set that right around there so that the link coupler is set. It probably won't be as good as from the factory, but it still does a pretty good job. This punch here is for the rivets. If you ever have to take a rivet out, or you happen to buy something that doesn't have that rivet, push the rivet in from the other side, and you use that punch there to round it out real nicely. I know some people are using screws and nuts instead of these rivets nowadays, and that's fine too. But if you want to go with the rivet, that tool is very handy. And then these are what you want to use for the link couplers. A multi-speed Dremel style tool can be very useful, but I'm going to recommend this carefully because even though it can be a wonderful tool when you know how to use it and you know which attachments to use for which purposes, it can also be a tool that can do a lot of damage very quickly if you're not sure. So I do use this to do some buffing and polishing on metals. I use the cutting attachment to cut track if I need a shorter section in my layout. And that's about all I use it for. I never use it on plastic. Maybe some people do, but I don't. So my recommendation to you is if you're very, very experienced with a Dremel style tool and you know how to use all the attachments properly, go ahead and use it. If not, there's other ways to do all the jobs that you can do with a Dremel. It may take a little more work and time, but they can still be done. So if you want to be using a Dremel to work on your trains, practice on something else first until you become very proficient with it. Then go ahead and use it with your trains. Some tools for electrical work that are good to have, just a standard soldering iron. They're very inexpensive. This one's over 40 years old now. Probably time to get a new one, but it still does the job. A multimeter that measures ohms and amps and volts. So that can be used for a variety of purposes when you're working with trains. And then these test leads, just simple wires that have an alligator clip at each end. And I love these things. When I'm working on whether it's a train or accessory or even layout work, if I'm not quite sure how something's going to go, I can put these in temporarily or move them around till I see what the right connection is that I want. And I can do all of this before I solder it. So these are very good to have. You see they come in a variety of colors. I used to just go to Radio Shack and get them. I really miss Radio Shack, but they're not as easy to find anymore. But the last place I found them, I believe, was Harbor Freight. So if you have that type of store around, you might want to check that out. Some people have workbenches where they have these cabinets with lots of little drawers that they can store parts in. Well, I don't quite have that luxury here, so I have some of these plastic containers that I keep in the drawers that you saw before in an earlier picture. And you can make them different sizes of compartments and sides. So I've got all kinds of things. I think I have 4 of these that I have different parts in. I've seen people also use these when they're taking maybe an engine apart to work on it. They'll have one of these where they put all the parts into a different compartment and they'll mark what that part is, so when they put the train back together, they know what they have. Well, what I use instead, I have some of these little bags that you can get from my hobby shop. Sometimes I even use just standard sandwich or snack Ziploc bags. But I can put the parts in there then, and I can mark what that is, and that works well for me. So either way, I'm not saying one is better than the other. Whichever works for you is great. For a reference guide, I also want to recommend this book here. I think just about everybody who does repair work probably has a copy of this, the Gilbert American Flyer Repair and Operating Guide by Thomas Barker. It not is only easy to use and has a lot of practical information, but it's very affordable. And it's very easy to find on Amazon and other places. There are some other guidebooks that are available too, but some of them can get extremely expensive. So you need to decide how far you want to get into repairing. I personally am doing a lot of things I would never imagined I was doing 10 years ago. But still, there are limits to what I will do, and each of you has to decide that for yourself too and invest in reference materials and tools accordingly. That does it for this video. Please add a comment with any suggestions you might have. We all need to learn from each other. Thanks for watching.